Would you like to learn a simple 4-step process that can free you from your obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors? If so, stay tuned. Hello, my name is Douglas Bloch. I'm an author, mental health educator, and depression survivor. Welcome to your Depression Recovery channel, where each week we talk about practical tools and coping strategies for healing from depression and anxiety. The title of today's video is How to Get Free of OCD. I kind of like rhymes. And speaking of OCD, which means obsessive compulsive disorder, I've always wanted to be an actor. And to be an actor or actress, you have to be a little bit obsessive. You have to really focus on words and really maintain that focus. And that kind of reminds me, when I was in high school, I did a theatrical performance on puns. It was a play on words. All right, that was a joke, so now we can move along. As you know, those of us who suffer from depression often can be very ruminative. We can focus on these negative thoughts and just get really tunnel visioned into them. And when this becomes more serious, it can develop into something that really interferes with our daily functioning, and it can become OCD, which stands for Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. And in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to teach you a very simple 4-step process for reducing and managing your obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors. But before we do that, let's define the term OCD. According to the Diagnostic Manual on Mental Health Disorders, OCD has 2 components. 1, obsessive thoughts. 2, compulsive behaviors. Obsessions are defined by 2 things. 1, recurrent and persistent thoughts, urges, or impulses that are experienced as intrusive and unwanted and cause marked anxiety or distress. 2, the individual attempts to ignore or suppress such thoughts, urges, or images, or to neutralize them with some other thought or action, that is, by performing a compulsion. OCD symptoms can vary from being mildly annoying to majorly disrupting a person's life. And recently I was fortunate enough to hear or see a very compelling description of OCD on a 60 Minutes interview with John Green, who's a very well-known young adults author and a YouTuber. He used the metaphor of a thought spiral to describe his obsessions, and this is what he said. The thing about a spiral is that it's an endless thought loop that goes on forever. So let's say that I'm eating this salad and I have a thought that someone might have bled into the salad. Now, that probably didn't happen, but instead of moving on to a second thought, that first thought just expands and expands and expands. And then I use compulsive behaviors to try to manage the worry and the overwhelmedness that this thought causes me. Now, what does he mean by compulsive behaviors? Again, the DSM-5 talks about what these things are. Examples of these compulsive acts that Green refers to include, first, repetitive behaviors such as hand washing, ordering, or checking, or mental acts such as praying, counting, and repeating words silently. These behaviors or mental acts are aimed at trying to reduce the anxiety and distress or preventing some future really horrible act from occurring. And, obviously, it's all consuming. You've got these thoughts that you can't control, then you've got these behaviors that you're trying to use to control the thoughts, and it just becomes all consuming, and it really is a kind of a hell. Fortunately, Jeffrey Schwartz, psychologist, and his colleagues at UCLA have developed a simple to use 4-step process to free yourself from compulsive behaviors, obsessive thoughts, and they describe this in a compulsively readable book called Brain Lock. So Schwartz defines the term brain lock as the brain getting stuck in an inappropriate groove. This is very similar to the thought spiral that John Green was talking about. So his first step to getting free of this, he calls relabel. This means calling these urges and these thoughts by their real name, right? Obsessive thoughts and urges. And he tells his patients to say, hey, look, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a bad person, nothing to be ashamed of, nothing defective about you. These are just chemical imbalances in the brain going haywire. That's all it is. And so he teaches his patients to say this mantra: It's not me, it's the OCD. It's not me, it's the OCD. Kind of sounds catchy, but that's exactly the point. It's not you, it's your brain going haywire. Once you have relabeled these disturbing thoughts as OCD, now you're ready for step 2 in this 4-step process, and that's called reattribute. And this answers the fundamental question, well, why don't these thoughts and compulsions go away? Well, the answer is that scientists have come up with this interesting metaphor that in OCD, the part of your brain that acts like a gearbox is not working correctly. It's like you're stuck in a certain gear, right? And you can't shift to the next gear, and which means you can't get out of that thought loop. Well, those of us who grew up learning how to drive stick shifts can really relate to being stuck in a gear. I guess they don't make manual transmissions like that anymore, but still, it's a really good image, being stuck in a gear and not being able to shift out of it. Now we come to step 3, and this I think is a really crucial step in this 4-step process, and it's called refocus. Now this is exactly what I talked about in my YouTube video on stopping rumination. Instead of fighting against the thoughts, pushing them away, because in OCD you can't really tackle it head on, but what you can do is use a kind of a mental martial art and just step aside or look to the left or look to the right and choose to focus on a different thought or a different behavior. You can even do this if you're still being tormented by the old thoughts. The key principle in this is it's not what you feel, it's what you do that counts. And of course, there are many, many things you can do. You can go for a walk or a quick run. In this 60 Minutes interview, when he's describing his favorite strategies, John Green says the number one activity that he likes is exercise. He says, exercise is pretty magical in my life. I don't enjoy it. I don't relish the thought of going for a run, but it is very helpful because when I am running, I can't think. Well, any of us who have used intense exercise to distract ourselves from obsessive thoughts or emotional pain can relate. That's why I ride my bike up Rocky Butte a couple of times a week. Now, another way to refocus is to simply reach out for support. I like to call a friend or call something called the Oregon Warm Line. It's a peer-run support network crisis line here. It's very, very good. Or I listen to music. The key is to do something enjoyable, something, again, that you can look left or right and choose a different thing to focus on. And of course, there are many enjoyable things you can do. I have this chart, which I just recommended in the last video, this color diagram where I talk about 45 or 50 different self-care strategies to improve your mood. And if you write douglasbloch@gmail.com, I'd be happy to send a chart to you. And then when you find yourself needing to refocus, you've got a bunch of stuff to choose from. The final step of this 4-step process is called Revalue. After practicing the first 3 steps over time, which, if you remember, are relabel, reattribute, and refocus, you will come to realize that your obsessive thoughts and compulsive urges are nothing more than powerless distractions that you can ignore. This is what Schwartz says at the conclusion of the book. He says, you revalue the obsessive thoughts as false messages coming from the brain that have no power over you. As you see the obsessions and compulsions for what they really are, the intensity of your symptoms will diminish, and as this happens, your brain will slowly come to function in a normal way. I hope you enjoyed this brief overview of this 4-step process for coping with OCD. If you want to learn more about it or read some personal anecdotes, I really highly recommend you read the book Brain Lock. In the meantime, here's my personal takeaway. If you have OCD, remember, it's all about the misfiring of a brain that's not working properly. It's not about you. And if you just gently turn aside and focus on some positive coping strategies instead of obsessing about the obsessions, right? If you just turn aside and do these positive coping strategies, you can learn to manage your OCD. Remember this really important psychological truth. Although we cannot always control what happens to us or what comes into our minds, we can control how we respond to it. I'm going to repeat that again. Although we cannot always control what happens to us or what comes into our minds, we can decide on how we respond to it. And therein lies our freedom. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I was really impressed with this work of Dr. Schwartz, and I think it's going to help a lot of people, including you guys who are watching. In the meantime, if you want to subscribe to this channel, you can click on the subscribe button in the closing credits. If you want to leave your comments, do so in the comments section, or you can write me, douglasbloch@gmail.com. And if you want to become a sustaining member of this channel, as many people have, in the closing credits, when you see the image of Patreon, this is a crowdfunding website page that a lot of artists and writers and videographers are using to fund their work. Please go to that page and contribute what you feel you can. And until we meet again, I wish you the best in your mental health recovery. Thank you so much for watching.